in the presence of these two individuals. Give them a very loud applause. We will now take questions from the audience, and again, keep in mind that we have a sitting judge here, so if you can't answer, she'll simply say, I'll defer to Dwight Pettit. Any questions? Okay, in the back.
Since no one raised their hand, you talked about the relationship of the appeals court to the Supreme Court. Presently, there's a 4-4 split on the Supreme Court. So can you explain to everyone what effect that will have on the decisions that you all have made on the appellate level in your court?
I can answer that question. If a case comes from, say, our court or any state Supreme Court or one of the federal circuits to the Supreme Court when there are only 8, and if it breaks down as a 4-4 decision, that's an affirmance of what happened below. So depending upon the posture of a given case, that can either be one way or the other. I started to say good news or bad news, but I'm trying to say that. But 4-4 is an affirmance of whatever happened at the lower court. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Rebecca, please.
I'd like to ask you both, since you both entered the law and you have seen so many substantive improvements, it must break your heart that today so many more African Americans are actually incarcerated than before, from the time you began your careers. My question is, what to you, Judge First, with the recent Kids for Cash scandal in Pennsylvania, what kind of protections are in place with our judiciary to make sure that the for-profit system does not corrupt the judicial system in the state of Maryland as it did so grievously with those kids? And also to ask you, what do you feel is your biggest hope for our diminishing the size of our incarcerated population?
Okay. I probably can't get into detail. I must say, as I suspect everyone in this room believes, and I certainly hope many more of us believe, that we do incarcerate far more young, primarily male, African Americans. There is, and the data supports that. And my guess is that it goes back to, and again, I'm speaking from the data, not from a personal view, although I support it, that it's the war on drugs. Those of us of a certain age remember back in the 80s where there was a lot of legislative initiatives that resulted in young black males being incarcerated for very lengthy periods. I have faith, not just in court-made law in the sense that, decisional law, but I'm ever the guarded optimist that, that as all 3 branches of the government will move toward, and primarily it has to be through legislation, improvements in our statutory laws. And I know there's from time to time, and this may very well be one of those times when there is a coalescence of interest and that I see as great opportunity for moving forward. I don't know, Mr. Pettit, if you feel the same way. I mean, we all have to be both optimistic and also sensible and guarded about our optimism.
I'm very optimistic about it, Judge. And one of the reasons this has become a bipartisan issue, which is crossing the lines of Republicans and Democrats. And Republicans, maybe because they see it because of the expense of incarceration, and maybe the Democrats because of the illegality and unconstitutionality of the incarceration. Judge Rivera is correct that all of this started in the war on drugs, which was really, now after being dissected, was a war basically on the African American community. And what you saw was the omnibus crime bill. Believe it or not, this is what Hillary is trying to defend now, in terms of what came about in her husband's administration. And also the states followed with this type of legislation. And the irony of it, because the legislators knew that there was a disparity in justice. They knew that the sentencing of a white kid to probation because of a possession of powder cocaine, at the same time the possession by a young African American of crack cocaine would get him 6 years or 10 years or what have you, that there was a disparity, and the political response was not of the magnitude that we needed to in fact reverse this political situation. And so we saw that from the mid-'80s up into the present time that this situation was allowed to exacerbate and continue, and the political structure of America is just now beginning to address this wrong that was allowed to perpetuate for 30 years. And so I am hoping that now that it's out there as a bipartisan issue, and I'll tell you, for example, I used to, as I was saying, Judge, I used to, not only did I go into the federal courts in terms of civil rights, but I used to do a lot of criminal work in the federal courts. And then they came out with the mandatory sentencing and the sentencing guidelines, and I said to myself, being an activist in terms of civil rights, how can I charge somebody $25,000 or $35,000 to represent them in federal court when I knew they were going to get a mandatory 25 or 30 years? Something was wrong with that. And so basically, in my practice, I basically, Judge, left the federal courts in and around the 1990s because I just thought that it was a no-win situation. And so I am optimistic that those things are getting ready to be corrected, because now they are of issue, not only on the local level and not only on the state level, but we're going to hear this debated to a great extent in the national upcoming presidential campaign.
Questions, please? Okay, we've got to get a question from a high school student. Yes,
When she first started talking, she was trying to talk
could you
about.
please stand up, please?
When she first talked, she was going to explain how the yeah, you didn't explain it. Okay, can you just explain it? Because I
Sure.
didn't hear you the first time.
Sure. We have in Maryland, and it isn't that, well, first of all, you know, we have the federal court system, and we have the state court system. Every state in the country has its own state court system. So Mr. Pettit was speaking periodically about matters that rose up in the federal system, and they sometimes coalesce right at the top at the United States Supreme Court. But just looking at the state court system, we have our, I don't call it a lower level court, because it really isn't. It is a first level court. It is the court where most things happen. It is where Judge Waxman and Judge Weinstein and formerly Judge Avery was served on that court. One of our courthouses is right across the parking lot. I'm kind of disoriented, but and so that's where, what's the jurisdictional limit, capital under money?
30,000.
30,000. So civil matters, civil disputes, up to where the dollars at issue are below 30 or 30 or below. Okay. They are litigated in the district court. Landlord-tenant matters are litigated at the district court. Misdemeanor criminal matters are litigated at the district court. And I know the judges will help me. A lot of domestic violence matters are litigated at the district court. What else might be? Parking and drive, yes, parking issues, driving issues are litigated at the district court. Okay, so that's the first level. What do you have, how many cases a year? We were talking about it, we think tens of thousands of cases, if not more, just in the Baltimore City District Court. So a lot of action at that level. Then you have our circuit courts. And they're each, we're the Baltimore City, that's one, plus 23 counties. There are 24 circuit courts in Maryland. Here in Baltimore, we have so much that goes on in our circuit courts that we actually have 2 buildings devoted to our circuit court. And that's where you have the more serious criminal offenses are being tried. That's where there are jury trials. The civil matters, major contract disputes, major employment issues, all the family law cases with, like divorce actions, they're litigated at that level. So 2 trial levels. Then we have, and the district court, I mentioned the district court is a unified court. When it was created by our, initially by legislative action and ultimately by constitutional amendment, that's where it's in place in our Maryland Constitution. One court spread around the state, courthouses everywhere, and 130 some or so district court judges. Maybe you will be a district court judge one day, or circuit, or maybe you'll take my place eventually on the Court of Appeals. It's a great job. Then we have 2 appellate courts. Used to only have one. Hundreds of years ago, we had 1 trial court, and we had the court on which I sat. But with our greater population, more litigation, more cases, my court couldn't handle all of it. So went to the legislature, said, please enact a bill that ultimately will build into our, if people vote for it, the Court of Special Appeals. It was called the Court of Special Appeals, oddly named when we look back on it. It was created only to take care of criminal appeals. But then very quickly, and there used to be only 5 judges on that court, there are now 15. But very quickly, we called their jurisdiction, the scope of what matters they can deal with. That has expanded, so now they are the court where all the appeals will go, save for a few that we, territory treaties and such things as that, go right to the Court of Appeals. And then our court, my court, the court on which my personal hero, Chief Judge Bell sat, that is, we operate like the United States Supreme Court. We are called a certiorari court. We are discretionary. We get to choose the cases we select. Petitions are filed asking us, decide this case, and under our jurisdiction, it has to be a novel issue that has broad public interest. So whereas the Court of Special Appeals will see several thousand cases a year, we might receive several thousand petitions, but we will only decide about 125 or 130 cases. The United States Supreme Court does the same thing, but it's getting cases from around the country. Thousands upon thousands of petitions. But they generally hear, I'd say these days, about between 65 and 70 cases a year. Does that help?
Yes.
I was very lovely.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And I might add that sometimes the courts will work together. In 1978, I think it was, I had the case of Church Scott versus Sutton Plaza, who was a state senator that was assassinated in his garage. And I brought the civil action in federal court for wrongful death. And Judge Harvey was the U.S. District Judge, and he admitted that there was no Maryland law. Almost what's happening with the Gray case now, and I know you can't.
No, I can't talk about
There was no Maryland law, so he certified the case to the Court of Appeals. We argued the case, I argued the case from the Court of Appeals, then we went back to the federal court, and then had the interpretation of law by the Maryland side.
Yes, that's right, and that still happens today. From time to time, we maybe will get a couple of those each year, where the federal court that is deciding federal law, federal constitutional law, as well as congressional activity, we decide Maryland law. But that doesn't mean that we don't have federal questions. We do, federal constitutional questions all the time. But every once in a while, even now, we will get a question from a judge on the district court, or not too long ago, we received a certified question from the Fourth Circuit. Please explain this matter of Maryland law, Maryland statutory law, or Maryland constitutional law. And then we answer the question with an opinion, and then it goes back to the, so that I'm so glad you brought that up. That is really a cooperation. The only time that a case that grows up from Judge Waxman or Judge Avery or Judge Weinstein's courtroom to the United States Supreme Court is when the question involves the federal Constitution, search and seizure, confession law, a due process concern, or equal protection. Otherwise, my court is the last stop for good or ill. We don't always get it right. We try very hard, every one of us, but sometimes the Supreme Court will say, no, it's a federal constitutional question.
Okay, we have one more question.
Mr. Pettit, I was wondering, two questions. One, what's your thought on the proposal that was presented recently about 1 year incarceration for a handgun violation? You're carrying an unlicensed handgun loaded. What your thought was on that? And two, I was wondering, how did it work out with your dad? What was the final resolution of that? I know you won, but what did he gain from it?
Well, let me start off with my dad. He was promoted to a GS-14 by agreement, from a GS-11 to a GS-14. I negotiated the back pay with the Department of the Army, which came out to something like $100,000, which back in that time was a lot of money. And so he ultimately retired victorious, promoted with all, as the court said, with all rights and privileges there too that went along with the new promotion and the money and so forth. So he came out a very, very victorious man. And also I was invited, and he was invited around the country to speak at the time. I see Tiger Davis here. Delegate Davis was very much into the civil rights movement in relationship to discrimination in employment and so forth. In fact, you worked at the Aberdeen.
No, your father and I were good friends.
Right. And so we were very successful. He was very, very elated at the results. And then, like I said, it became national law for the nation. As to your second question, believe it or not, I'm very conservative when it comes to the Second Amendment. In this instance, I think the law is already on the books in terms of mandatory sentencing. See, what the Sun paper said last week, and the Chief Judge here can correct me if I'm wrong. The Sun paper said for felony. Well, as I read and understand the law, and I have several cases in where this is being argued as we speak, the law says that any person who is convicted of a crime of violence, a felony, or a crime that carries a penalty of 2 years or more is what is called a prohibited person. And if you're a prohibited person, you are subject to, at the discretion of the state's attorney, if they bring the case under the prohibited person statute, you are subject to a 5-year mandatory, period. And in federal court, you are subject to a mandatory even higher than that. And so those laws are already on the books at the operation and discretion of the state's attorney. Now, whether the 1 year part, that really bothers me, as to whether or not there's going to be a mandatory, you're going to take the discretion from the judges, the district court judges who are here, you're going to take that discretion and say they are compelled, regardless of a person's record, a person's history, or what have you, that they're compelled to give them 1 year if they possess a handgun. I find that to take away from the discretion of the judges, and I can't accept it. I think the gun problem is real, but I think the mandatory sentences are already there, and to bring that to 1 year mandatory for persons with the judge removed of discretion, I think what you're going to have to really do, it's a political question where you're going to have to push the state's attorneys to exercise their discretion in terms of mandatory, in terms of these gun crimes. I think you already got a mandatory, if the crime is used, if the gun is used in a crime of violence, that's a 10-year mandatory. If you're a prohibited person, there's a 5-year mandatory. So the laws are there. And in my opinion, all they have to do is exercise that discretion to bring those particular mandatory charges. Now, notice I said earlier I disputed mandatories, but I disputed mandatories in areas where you have 3 peats, where a person, because you're convicted the 3rd time, you're going to get a mandatory 20. Or possession, where you got possession of marijuana or possession of cocaine, you're going to get a mandatory 10, 15. Those mandatories I have a problem with. I don't really have a problem with the mandatories in relationship to use of guns in the commission of crime or in terms of possession. But I do have it in terms of I do have issue with taking the discretion away from the state's attorneys.
On that note, I want to once again thank our distinguished panel for being here and being a part of this. It has been outstanding for our 10th annual Black History Month event. Before I bring up Peter Handel, the man who made this, man and woman Pat, who made this all possible. Okay, if anyone wants one of Mr. Pettit's books, he has them with
For free. Is it free?
I don't know.
I always bring a class about it.
Okay. Hold it. Before we leave, J4P, Peter Handel, who's coming up in a few minutes here, said that they will buy the book. Let's say thanks and for the round of applause. Now, before I bring Peter up, I just want to acknowledge a couple of people who walked in since the program began. We got a gentleman by the name of Eric Booker, who's Chief Code Enforcement Officer for the City of Baltimore. We have Richard Carter, who's a stalwart in this community and elsewhere. Thank you, Richard Carter. And we have none other than Tiger Davis, Tiger Davis, who was a delegate and community activist years ago. Tiger, and we have Kwaizi and Fume here. He wants to say hello, but his tongue's tied right now. We all know who he is. I thought I saw Liz Copeland. Did she come in? She was there. In and out. And Antonio Hayes, did he come in? In and out. In and out, okay. But I also want to say to Loretta Gubernardis, who's filming this thing, she's doing it this year without her husband, who passed away recently. And we thank you for being here, and we thank you for Lou for the past 10 years, Loretta. We miss it too. Thank you very much. And now, before we leave, one quick question to Peter Handel as he comes forward. Peter is the man of the hour, and Pat is the woman of the hour. Where's Pat? Stand up, Pat. She's here. Peter, you've been here for more than 25 years. And when I opened, I started with a math question for the high school students. Now I have one for you. Your 25 years equals how many days?
It was actually 28 years.
No, I stopped it at the 0.25%. Okay.
No, but there are people here that were present at the beginning. I mean, Al Collins over there.
Okay.
Terry Blackwell just asked a question. John Hergenroder, there's John back there. They were literally part of the team at the very beginning, on the government side or on our side, that helped build the state complex. So thank you for being here.
I will
I
leave
don't
it
know
at
the
that.
number of hours. I have no idea.
No, you're the boss, so I'll leave it at that.
No, I just wanted to actually, the chief judge, I mean, this is phenomenal, and Mr. Pettit, it was pretty, I mean, I learned a couple of things here. I mean, first of all, you both were very moving, and what you've accomplished in what you do, what you're still accomplishing. But, you know, I think the President Grant, Mr. Pettit, about once every 5 years, and I have to start thinking about it with more respect as a result of what you were saying. But, you know, we have been here for 28 years, and it's a long time, but I think we look at it, Pat and I and the whole J4P team, as a win-win-win. I mean, it's a win, we believe, for the state of Maryland, because we like to think of ourselves as good property owners and responsive and doing the right thing. It's certainly a win for Pat and for me. The state of Maryland is AAA credit. The state pays its rent on time, which is something we very much like. But it's also, we believe, a win for the neighborhoods that we are in. If you look around the area and you see the Walgreens and the Family Dollar and the other things that are here in the area, the jobs that we create here, the safety, this is literally one of the safest areas in the entire city of Baltimore by the police statistics. I mean, we're proud of being able to do that sort of thing and help. So it's a win-win-win. So really, I want to thank you. It was really moving to listen to what you've accomplished and what you've done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, well, this is me and Al Collins. Collins is one of the persons who made this particular location develop into what it is now. Mr. Collins, explain how you just wanted a cafeteria?
At the point that this whole project started, I was the director of the Department of Social Services for the city of Baltimore. And we were looking for office space, and Mr. Handel came to me and talked about building an office space up here. And it was a little adventurous, so it was thinking out of the box. And I recall, because of the conditions that we face as a staff, I said, Peter, I will support this concept. The only thing I wanted, my staff has no place in which to eat in the buildings where we were. I want a cafeteria. So the rest of this is history. Starting with me telling Mr. Handel, I wanted a cafeteria for my staff if he was going to develop this project. And you see the rest of the community. There was, the Wendy's and all the other things that are spurring from this kind of project. It's just an awesome walk in history for me.
A government agency does fight on its stomach.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's the way we do. I mean, I've been in government all my life. I mean, from local, state, federal, back local, state, federal. And you're exactly right. That's what we do. We fight on our stomachs. Over the years, I've attended quite a few events put on by Peter Handel and the folks at J4P. Many of the staff, some of the staff that are here, I know. Peter has become a great friend, and I highly respect the events that he had handled here. I usually come once or twice a year to whatever they're doing, as a show of appreciation, but also as a show of what government working in the partnership with private sector can do.
On a rate of 1 to 10, how would you rank the J4P associates in community involvement?
Well, I would have rated a 10 plus, if I can go that far. I mean, they're involved with conversations with not only just their particular property, but also seeing how that property can be an enlightenment to the community, how it can be attractive to people, and how you can spur other development from the project. For instance, we started at the garden shop here. This is the latest building, and there are other things that we could do.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Collins.
My pleasure.
I want to thank Rebecca Hoffberger for being a part of the program here. Rebecca, you have anything else you want to add at this point?
No, just, I think J4P, again, comes down to Peter and Pat's vision and what they've done, even with the wonderful redoing of the murals in this neighborhood. They care about people, and this neighborhood is palpably better because they're here. And so is actually lots of stuff in Maryland. And John, I'm just a big admirer of you, as you know. You are the easiest interviewer I've ever, and I get interviewed all the time, but through the Raiders Company, and certainly, and Lou of blessed memory, who is just a treasured human being. It is always a pleasure to see you. And I'm going to hear you on the radio still, right?
Yes, you will.